This conference will now be recorded.
Today's grant writing proposal webinar was. Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulties. So today's grant writing workshop was information gathered from GrantStation.com and articles written by Cynthia M. Adams, the CEO of GrantStation. Today we are going to be talking about how to get started in writing grant proposals, what exactly a letter of inquiry is, and a full proposal. So when the objectives that I hope that you gather from what it takes to get started is to gather and polish the basic documents for grant writing, generating compelling proposals using these basic documents, and to feel confident as you begin writing grant requests. I know not everybody is a grant writer. I'm learning as I go as well. So sometimes the confidence isn't always there. So by doing these next few actions will help build some confidence when you start writing your grants. The first thing you need to do on your computer or your shared drive at work is to develop a folder that you know where it's at called grant writing documents. This folder will house all of your working documents. None of these documents should be made to look pretty. They're just basic Word documents that has information that you will need later in your grant writing endeavors. Keep each document in the simplest form, so don't format anything unless it's just simple bullets. The reason why is when you go to copy and paste things from this folder and these documents into your grant proposals, you will be spending extra time trying to figure out formatting with each thing formatted. So don't make these documents look pretty. Just keep them in their raw form. And review these documents regularly with your board, with your stakeholders, with your staff, anybody that contributes to your organization. Have them look over them, and then if you make any corrections, date and timestamp those so you know that you're getting the latest document that's up to date. In this folder, you should include a document that has your mission statement, any IRS tax statements, and your 501c3 status, a document featuring your organizational history, your organizational structure, operating plan and executive overview, your yearly budget, as well as any project budgets, which we'll get into in detail later. Any audits that you have had your organization complete for financials, these are usually done by CPAs. So keep a copy of the audits in this folder so you can have those at your fingertips and don't have to go find them. And then also short bios on your board of directors, any board committees, and administration and staff. So after you've compiled, or if you've gathered all these documents, and we'll discuss them more in detail as we go on, if you have them already, just go ahead and throw those in your folder. The next part is to develop a needs statement. And this is going to be program specific. So if you're writing a grant for, say, new playground equipment, you would write a needs statement for that. If your organization is writing a grant for another project, you'll need a needs statement for that. But part of building a powerful needs statement is keeping copies of everything and anything you read that will help build your needs statement. And you're going to keep these copies in your grant writing document folder. So you can make a folder that says research and put all of these news articles that you gather and any information that will help you build a needs statement in this document. You can use quotes from press releases, letters to the editor, editorials, news scripts, even radio and TV shows, although with those, you'll have to contact the station to get a transcript. And these are all going to be used to create a sense of urgency. Creating a sense of urgency will make the grant maker want to fund your project. Just listing news headlines and dates at the beginning of your needs statement for your grant request can be very powerful and immediately create a sense of urgency for your request. You may want to write up several case histories, such as clients served, issues you've addressed, etc., that can be used as short vignettes to help open the needs statement. Having written these up ahead of time, you will save considerable time when preparing the grant request. You can also use to create a needs statement in-house surveys that you've completed, as well as regional, state, and national survey results can be used to help writing your grant needs statement. Collecting this information, though, will be helpful and save you time, but if you use any surveys and documentations, you'll want to make sure that you have accurate and up-to-date statistics. And we will discuss the needs statement further in a later section. So after you've gathered any of your basic documents, and we'll talk about how to polish those up later on, the next is if you find a grant, most grants require a letter of inquiry. So in this section, we're going to talk about how to understand the multiple purpose importance of a letter of inquiry or an LOI. We're going to be able to define the different components of an LOI and find a way to strengthen each of these sections. So why develop a letter of inquiry? Developing a strong letter of inquiry is an essential step to securing a grant award. The letter of inquiry should summarize the project idea, usually no more than 3 to 5 pages. There are many grant makers now that require you to submit an electronic LOI, so the wording can be limited. And a letter of inquiry is what you typically send to a foundation before you send your full proposal. You'll send this letter stating your project and why you need the funds, and then they'll review it. And if they want to further investigate your project, they will then ask for a full proposal. So that's kind of the importance of a letter of inquiry. So you want a strong one. And also developing a letter of inquiry for each project, it can serve as a working paper to help research and identify appropriate grant makers. It can be a talking paper to help engage your staff, board, and other possible partners and collaborators. A letter of inquiry can be sent to potential grant makers, and it can be used in full proposals to grant makers that only require a minimal application. There are challenges, though, to developing a letter of inquiry. One challenge is you demonstrate your commitment to pursuing the idea. So the letter of inquiry, you want to demonstrate that you have a commitment to this project and your organization has a commitment to this project. So developing an LOI will help show that you are committed to this purpose. It also provides the opportunity for you to organize your thoughts on paper. It identifies the information, commitments, and additional research necessary to create a winning proposal. Your letter of inquiry is a living document. It changing as your project matures. Budget items will be added, so references to the budget will need to be changed in your LOI, and the time frame may shrink or grow. So once you create your LOI, be sure to update it as you begin writing your full proposal to change things that might change in your project so that your LOI accurately reflects your grant proposal. So some of the elements that are part of an LOI is the title page, an introduction, and statement of needs. I'm going to go back real quick to the title page. The title page is with your organization's contact information on it. It often includes a graphic to engage the reader. You can also include the organization's mission statement on the cover, especially if you've never applied to this grant maker before. Showing your mission statement on the cover will help draw them in. After you've done your title page, you'll move on to your introduction. This is a fairly short section, perhaps half a page, that serves to introduce the reader to your organization, where you are located in this world, and the population or issues you address, as well as a brief overview of what you will be covering in your grant request. This should be very short. Next, after you've done your introduction, you'll move on to your statement of needs or your needs statement. This is the longest section of the LOI. The needs statement can be a full page or more and presents as well as lends some documentation to the problem or need you will address in the grant request. After you've got your needs statement out of the way, you'll move on to your organizational history, and this is something that you can pull from that grant folder that I was telling you about earlier. But your organizational history is the summary, vision, the summarized vision of your organization's history and current situation, and can be a half a page, up to a half a page. After you've got your project narrative, or after you've got your organizational history, you'll move on to your project narrative, which is an abbreviated version of the project description that you're proposing to be funded. This section often is just a half a page. You don't want to share too much because you want to draw their interest in and have them ask you for another, or for your full proposal. So you just want to give them a taste of your proposal, but you want to make sure with your project narrative that you're drawing them in so they will ask for your full proposal. After you've done your project narrative, you will include your timeline. The timeline indicates when the project will happen, and it can be as short as one line in your LOI. Say the project for new playground equipment will be completed in 2021. Something as simple as that. After you have your timeline, you will briefly describe your budget. It can be an abbreviated cost summary, and once again, it can be just a few lines. Following your budget will be your funding strategy. This section goes hand in hand with the budget and tells the reader how you will secure funding for the project in the future, and it is usually just a paragraph. So now we will go into detail over each of these sections. And I see there might be some comments in the chat. Oh, okay. So once again, if you have any questions in the chat or any questions throughout this, please post it in the chat. So I talked about a title page. Beginning the LOI with a title page that includes relevant information such as the date, contact person, and phone number is essential. Adding a graphic such as a compelling photo or a vignette or quotation, you can add your organization's mission statement as well if you're not using it somewhere else in the LOI. You'll also want to include your project name. Your project name is something that will take time to develop. Remember, you want a title to reflect the outcomes of the overall project, if possible. Try to use the title to tweak the reader's interest. Stay away from boring or non-descriptive titles. And try to give the person sitting at the table fighting to keep your project in the to be funded category a handle. If you use a long, unimaginative title, that person has trouble even remembering it, much less arguing your case. So make sure that your title is attention grabbing, and whoever's on the other end reading your proposal or your letter of inquiry, they're going to want to be able to use that title to fight for you. So make sure you have an engaging title. After you've got your title page, we'll move on to the introduction. This section of the LOI introduces the reader to the present situation and can be quite short. It is a way of communicating to the potential grant maker the social, economic, and environmental context of your project or program. It might seem backwards, but it's often beneficial to write the introduction after drafting the need statement and the project narrative. Once those are written, you'll know exactly what general information you will most appropriately introduce, the reader to your request. Be aware that the introduction you write for a foundation can be dramatically different from the one you write for a corporation. Foundation's interests are going to center on your clientele and the community you serve, as well as the problem or need you face. And while these issues are also important to the corporation or corporate donors, they will also want to know how their corporation's name can reach a lot of people. So a corporation donor might be interested in the demographics of the region, the number of visitors, and the visibility of their name and logo. Basically, they want to understand the market you may conceivably reach for them. Also keep in mind that an introduction written for an in-state grant maker is much different than one written for an out-of-state grant maker. Out-of-state grant makers often need to understand the geography of a place, such as a wilderness area, rural farming community, or inner-city neighborhood, and the demographic and economic profile if they are to make an informed decision. An in-state grant maker, however, may take exception to such introductions as they probably take pride in understanding the state in which they operate. The introduction should be concise and contain information that captures the reader's attention and interest. It introduces the subject matter, setting, and principal players, and provides some background to the issues you will present in your project and needs description. Here are a few rules of thumb about the introduction. Keep it short, describe your situation, make it compelling, and engage the reader. Each introduction needs to set the stage for your request. The idea is to draw the reader into your world. So the statement of needs. It is extremely important for the LOI to articulate the problem or need clearly and develop a compelling argument for funding. It is also important to articulate the opportunity for the grant maker to invest in your project. The idea is to draw the reader into your proposal quickly, establishing a connection that they do not want to break. State the facts and let the readers draw their own conclusion. You may want to consider one or more of the following methods to document the current situation. Perform a needs survey, cite statistics from articles and research, quote community leaders or experts in the field, use case histories, describe a national need and focus it on your area, and state needs in terms of one person, such as a village resident or group member. Remember, it is very important to create a compelling reason for the grant maker to request a full proposal. So don't limit the time and effort you put into writing this section. And opening statements for a need statement. You can research the history of the problem or need and do a historical comparison to start off your need statement, or you can also use a few facts when comprised with the situation that most Americans can identify with. You can help draw the reader into the very specific situations of the community or region where the project will occur. When you open with a broad comparison, you then need to narrow that focus in the following paragraph, all the while keeping the readers engaged. So you can start with the giant problem nationwide, and then as you're writing this, narrow it down into focusing on what your organization is focused on. You can also use engaging vignettes or stories, which can be drawn from news articles. So that's a little overview of the need statement or statement of needs. We'll also discuss it further in our full grant proposal section. And like I said, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat and we will take periodic breaks to answer any. The next part should be relatively easy for everybody, which is your organizational history. The organizational history should establish both the organization's credibility and its qualifications for receiving funding. On the screen is a checklist for what needs to be covered in this section of your letter of inquiry. You need to establish who is applying for funding, state the organization's purpose and goals, describe programs and activities, define clients or constituents, provide evidence of accomplishments, offer quotations and endorsements in support of accomplishments, and support qualifications in the area or area of activities for which funds are sought. So this is going to be all about your organization, and be sure to include all of these so that you provide credibility for the grant funder. Also, refer to how the goals of the grant maker apply to your project and your organization. So as you're looking at grants, you're going to write your organizational history and keep that in your folder. But as you apply for the grants that you're finding, you're going to adapt that organizational history and use some of the buzzwords that the grant makers use in their application process to tie into your organizational history. This will help kind of create a connection. Although remember, in your letter of inquiry, you won't be able to cover the organizational history in depth. You will only have a few paragraphs, so you'll need to summarize all of this information. In the full proposal, you can expand on each statement, but for the purpose of a letter of inquiry, keep it short but engaging. Remember, you want this section to succinctly tell your story and make the reader want to learn more about who you are and what you do. Once you have your organizational history ready, you can then move on to your project narrative. Now, every time you apply for a grant for a different project, you're going to have a project narrative, but you also want to be sure to save each project narrative in your grant writing folder. So in case you don't receive the grant that you apply for, you still have that information for other grant opportunities. The project narrative is a description of the project or program you propose, its goals and objectives, and a brief plan of action. The project narrative should make a clear connection or transition from the need statement to your organization's capacity to solve the problem. This is another great place for you to be able to use your mission statement, or at least a quote from the mission statement, if you haven't already used it somewhere else. The project narrative often begins with the goal of the project, followed by a summary of the project objectives. The reader now knows what you intend to do and how you intend to do it. We will talk more about project or goals and objectives later on in the full project narrative. But be sure to remember that goals can be specific or they can be visionary. It all depends on the amount of funding you are requesting. Each goal should have one or more objectives. Each objective should specify a result, not an activity. Describe just one result you want to accomplish. Tell when the result is to be accomplished. Clearly relate to the goal. Be specific, measurable, and verifiable, and allow for flexibility on the part of those implementing it. We'll look at a couple examples of goals and objectives now. So specific goals, such as to increase the participation of youth ages 9 through 15 throughout Baylor County to embrace reading on a daily activity. This is a goal for a small grant of up to maybe $100,000. The project is achievable within the context of the size of the grant. So you want to make sure that your goals for the project relate to the grant funder's scope and size of their grant making ability. You don't want to ask, say, the community chest for $100,000 when their average grant making possibilities is usually a couple $1,000s for our community. So you don't want to ask for more than the grant maker is available, and you want to define your goals to fit those grant making abilities. The next is a visionary goal. Visionary goals, this might be a request for an extraordinary amount of money, such as $500,000 or even $1 million. And the goal can be much more broader and harder to achieve and measure. So that's more of a visionary goal. Once you've got your goals defined, then you'll move on to your objectives. And here's a couple of examples of objectives. To identify a site conceptual design for a facility where residents and visitors can learn about the nature, history, geology, and resource issues of the inland sea by fall of 2016. So this is an action item. They start with two. You can see the difference between a goal. And like I said, we'll discuss more down the line about goals during our full proposal section. Once you have your goals written and your objectives, you can then start on your timeline for your letter of inquiry. The timeline answers the question, how long will this project take, and the use of the specific funds requested. For example, a construction project may take 2 years to complete, but the grant funds you are seeking will be used for the design stage, which may last only 3 months. You need to be clear about both timelines so that the grant maker knows when you will need the funds and how quickly they will be expended. For purposes of the LOI, you want to keep this section short, as it's not going to help sell your project to the grant maker, and it can use up valuable space. The budget summary section of the letter of inquiry includes the cost for the overall project and a summary of how the funds will be raised and spent. Remember, your budget is the financial representation of your project, So it must be believable. Rule number 1, don't make up your budget. That's probably the biggest. You don't want to ask for too much or too little. You want to make sure you do your research when you're doing your budget. And we will talk about the budget in full for the full proposal. But for the budget summary, you want to place your request in context. State your organization's total annual budget, or the total budget for the grant or for the program or project if you are requesting only partial funding from this source. Show community support, such as in-kind contributions of time, services, and supplies, and discuss your plans for future funding. Make reasonable funding requests with respect to the scope of your project and the grant maker's resources. So you might be asking, how much should I request? To make sure you're not asking the grant maker for too much or too little, you need to review the grant maker's giving profile and history. It can be helpful to look at the grant maker's IRS Form 990 on GuideStar, which is a free website that you can use to research grant makers, and use GuideStar to determine average grant amounts. Never ask on the high side of their giving if this is your first request to the grant maker. Asking the average amount or a bit lower will increase your chances of receiving the grant award. If you have received several grants from this grant maker, then it's fine to go ahead and ask for a higher amount because you've already established credibility with this grant maker and a relationship with them. And future funding. The future funding section of an LOI summarizes a plan for continuation after funds from this grant and others have been expended. Not every project needs to address future funding, but it can strengthen your proposal by demonstrating that you won't be dependent upon one funding source forever. Most grant makers are buying a piece of the future. It is in their best interest to see your project continue. If their guidelines don't ask about future funding, you can still add this information in the budget summary. It can also help build credibility if it is clear that the amount you are asking from a particular grant maker won't cover all the cost of the project or ongoing cost. So that completes the portion of the letter of inquiry. Do we have any questions? It doesn't look like we have any questions yet. So once again, if you do, just post them in the chat section and we will, I will try to get to them at the end. This is the last portion of how to write a grant proposal. So you've got your, excuse me, you've got your folder with all of your information, all of the pre-pieces that you can write. Now we're going to be able to organize your approach in writing a full grant proposal. We're going to talk about understanding the different components of the proposal. And then finally, we're going to consider new ways of delivering standard information. So once you've sent your letter of inquiry off to a grant funder and they say, hey, we really like this project, we think this organization can accomplish it, and we're interested in possibly funding it, then they will ask for a full proposal typically. And this is where the fun and hard work begins. So you need to be prepared. Grant writing is all about being organized. It will make your life so much simpler if you're not going through stacks of papers on your desk or folder after folder trying to find all this information. So in order to be prepared, you're going to want to be organized. And there's a couple different types of grants out there. There's government agencies and private founders, and under private founders, there's also corporate funders. So whether you're going to write a grant proposal for a government agency or a private funder, such as a foundation or corporation, the components of the proposal are quite similar. Although the amount of detail required may be considerably different, the basic elements are generally the same. The application process for government funds, although is more complicated than submitting an application typically for a private grant maker. Government applications always require completing numerous forms and can take several months to write, whereas an application for private funding may take a week or two to write with no forms and few other attachments necessary. So collaborating. Collaborating is important when you're writing a grant. Collaborating with other coworkers, with other organizations, and it will help further your grant proposal. The assigned grant writer should work closely with others to gather the information needed to develop a grant proposal. If the person who conceived the project isn't the grant writer, he or she should be involved in developing the grant proposal, especially the goals and objectives, the plan of action, and budget. However, you want the grant request to be stylistically consistent, so limit the number of people involved in the actual writing. A basic grant writing rule of thumb is do not write by committee. So if you are collaborating, pick one person to write your full proposal, but use all of your other collaborators to help pull in information and resources so that you can write the best proposal. If you have multiple people writing one proposal, it's going to seem choppy, and in the end, cause you to do a lot more work because you'll have to go back through and edit and make sure it all sounds the same. Grant reviewers appreciate brevity and clarity. To achieve this, include section headings and subheadings, leave space between sections, choose a readable typeface and font size, and use standard margins. I think we all know that we should not use Comic Sans for our grant proposal. So make sure it's the font is easy to read. And always use page numbers and identifying page headers or footers. And don't use your letterhead anywhere in the request except for your cover letter. You don't want to, your grant reader will not want to flip through and see your letterhead on every single page, and it will also take up valuable space. So only use that on your cover letter. The approach to writing a full proposal. A grant proposal is a series of building blocks of information, with each part supporting and leads to the following part. You are simply developing layer after layer of information that eventually all fits together and convincingly presents your request. Convincingly presents your request. The very first step in developing a grant proposal is to organize your approach and to create an outline of what the reviewer needs to know. You will want to read over the entire grant application, noting any of the requirements the grant funder asked for. The work outline should be detailed, paying attention to what needs to be accomplished in order to submit a compelling grant request. And to do this, you can set up either a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. And as you're going through the grant application that you're going to be applying for, you can mark down any task and set a due date. So in the first column, you'll have tasks. So the first task might be a cover sheet. You'll put a due date, and then any descriptions that needs to be included in that, anything that needs to be included in that task, put under the description. And you want to create a task and due date for every single item that you need to develop for your grant, and set deadlines. When applying for grants, you want to try to get your grant proposal in 2 weeks before the deadline. I know that's not always possible, but if you get it in that early and say you might have forgotten something, that might give the grant reader a chance to contact you and say, hey, we got your grant, but we missed the budget summary. Could you please send that? You'll still have time. But if you submit it at 11 o'clock at night on the due date, and the due date is 11:59, that you won't have that opportunity always. And I'm not saying every grant reader or funder will give you that opportunity, but submitting it early and using your work outline to set deadlines to be sure to get it in early will give you a better fighting chance. So here is a general list of grant proposal elements. Like I said, each one of these builds upon another. And we will go through and talk about the introduction, organizational history and purpose, or the capability of the organization. We'll revisit the statement of need. We'll also revisit the project or program narrative, the goals and objectives, plan of action or work plan, evaluation and measurement outcomes, timeline, budget and budget narrative, attachments and supplemental materials, and we'll also talk about the executive summary. Now, as many of you know, the executive summary typically always comes first in a grant proposal. However, it's the one thing that you should probably write last because it is a summary. And all of these elements can be adapted from what you wrote for your LOI or your the basic documents that you put in your grant writing folder. You can take those and adapt them and expand on them for your grant proposal. So the introduction to a proposal serves as a way of communicating to the potential grant maker the social, economic, environmental context of your organization. It provides the reader with a brief description of your geographic and social situation, which your reader may be unfamiliar with. The introduction is concise and contains information that captures your reader's attention and interest. It introduces the subject matter, setting, and principal players and provides some background to the information you will present in your proposal project narrative and needs description. Sometimes the introduction and the organizational description history are combined in some grants. It's often beneficial to write the introduction after drafting the needs statement and the goals and objectives. Once those sections are written, you'll know exactly what general information will most effectively introduce the reader to your request. The introduction you write for a private foundation can be significantly different from a corporate funder due to corporations typically want to know what market value they're getting out of funding your project. A checklist to make sure that you have incorporated everything that you need to in your introduction includes communicate the context of your project or program, give a brief description of your geographic and social situation, be concise, capture the reader's attention and interest, introduce the subject matter, introduce the setting of principal players, and provide some background to your issue. The organization description. Most grant application guidelines require an organizational description section. This section of the grant proposal provides the grant maker with the history of the organization applying for funds, as well as its current programs and structures. The primary objective for including the history of your organization in a grant request is to establish the organization's credibility and its qualifications for funding. Grant makers won't want to fund your project if they don't believe that you are capable of carrying it out or if you lack credibility. So you want to make sure you have a strong organizational description. You're going to develop two adaptations of the history. Both adaptations should refer to or quote from your organization's mission statement. The first should be very short, and you've probably already done that if you've submitted an LOI. The short version will be used for the letter of inquiry and will be quite short. The second version should be detailed, up to 2 pages. Also use the short version, the long version should be used for full grant proposals, including federal and state requests or other proposals which require more detailed information. You should consider beginning with a story about how the organization was founded and why. Storytelling is a powerful tool which you can use to your advantage. It inherently provides credibility to the organization and almost always engages the reader. Once you set the stage, immediately move on to the present day description of the organization and its current programs. The present day description should include your organization's missions, goals, and programs and activities. It might also include a 2 or 3 line summary of your current operating budget. Once you've relayed the present circumstances of your organization, you should summarize the most recent set of critical episodes so the grant maker knows what you are facing today. Critical episodes include organizational changes, new initiatives or innovations, or even a traumatic event such as a major budget cut. Once you have your organizational description, that should lead into your statement of need or problem statement. Once again, you will want to develop a powerful problem or need statement. which is critical if you want your proposal to remain in this selection process round after round, as others are eliminated. The problem or need statement describes specific, often negative conditions of a community or a situation. This statement leads into the project narrative, which tells the potential funder what the organization intends to do to address the identified problem or need. The problem or need statement should paint a picture of the overall issue. The need statement should engage the reviewer, capturing their attention so they want to continue to read your proposal. One effective method you can use is to begin with an individual case or history or vignette. After you've painted a picture, you want to ensure that you describe the problem in terms of clients or the community using statistics or other documentation. As you move into documenting the problem or need, clearly describe the current situation. At this point, it is important to demonstrate that there is an urgent need to close the gap between what is and what should be. To establish what is, you can cite relevant statistics or quotes from the reports or studies. You can establish what should be by using expert statements or examples of successful projects in other places. You're also going to want to refer to the organization's internal needs if their request is for capacity building grants or operating support. Building a clear link between the problem or needs presented and the grant maker's funding priorities, even though you may feel the pressure of space constraints, you do not want to use generalities when specific information is available. Specifics are what help your proposal rise above the competition. For example, if a request for a proposal states that the funder wants to support organizations with an expertise in a certain field, you don't want to simply write, "We have much expertise with these types of programs." Be specific. Say that you have expertise in X, Y, and Z of that field that the grant maker is trying to provide funding for. Always be specific within grant writing. It is important and it helps build credibility. And also keep in mind, by eliminating redundancies, simplifying language choices, and using specific details in your proposal or in your problem or need statement, you can effectively demonstrate to the funder why your program deserves their attention and how it connects to their own goals and objectives. Once you have your statement of needs or problem statement, you can then work on your project or program narrative. This is the fun part. This is why you're asking for the money. The project or program narrative is a description of the approach you're taking to address the specific issue articulated in the problem or need statement. The length and detail of the narrative section depends on the number of pages allowed, the amount of money you are requesting, and the information needed to portray your project or program accurately. So this can, depending on the amount of money and the size of the grant, some grant makers put a word limit. Maybe it's 500 words, maybe it's 1,000 words, or maybe it's 3 pages. So this section can be as big or as small as needed for the grant maker. The project or program narrative should include or should be describe both the vision and practical approach of the project or program, clearly connect the project or program to the mission and overall activities of your organization, demonstrate an understanding of the subject matter. It should summarize how the project or program will be implemented. It should provide a profile of the clients you will serve, if applicable, and how you intend to connect with them. It should also summarize the plan of action and the timeline for the project or program. And it should articulate how you will staff the project and how you will be involved, including any volunteers, consultants, or staff. When developing a grant proposal, you typically write the project or program narrative after you've developed the goals and objectives, action plan, timeline, budget, and outcome measurements and method of evaluation. So once you get all the nuts and bolts of your program done, then you will go back and write your narrative. And this will be a summary of those items. Goals and objectives for a full proposal. Almost all grant application guidelines require that you state the goal and/or objectives of the proposed program or project that needs funding. A proposal that clearly states a project's goals and objectives has created the groundwork for a compelling grant request. Goals are the long-term vision of your project or program. Goals define what will occur for the people you serve if the program is successful. Goals must be potentially achievable within the context of the grant request. You can think of goals as performance targets. Performance targets embrace change and often focus on the people who are being served by the project. After you have your goals, you will then create your objectives. Objectives are achievable and measurable within the scope of the proposed work. When you are writing an objective, start with to, followed by a verb, and then give a short explanation of what you're trying to accomplish, and if possible, add the time it will take to achieve the objective. So a quick checklist for goals and objectives. Always specify a result, not an activity. Describe just one result you want to accomplish. Tell when the result is to be accomplished, so the time frame. Emphasize what will be done and when, but don't tell why or how it will be done. Clearly relate each objective to one or more of the goals. Make sure the objectives are specific, measurable, and verifiable, and be sure to be flexible. Allow for flexibility on the part of those implementing the objective, such as, we never realized that COVID-19 would have, or this current epidemic would be such a problem, and it's causing a lot of grantees to scurry and find ways to fulfill their grants that they're already starting. So be flexible because things happen, and make sure that your staff who will be implementing these grants can be flexible, and that your time frame and your goals and objectives allow for room for flexibility, because things are constantly changing and you never know what's going to happen. So flexibility will be key. Next is the plan of action for a full proposal. The plan of action, sometimes referred to as action steps or tasks, is a step-by-step description of what you will do to accomplish each objective you've defined in your grant request. The plan of action can make or break your request. Incorporating details in this section of the grant request is critical. If you cannot demonstrate to the grant maker that you have a strong, workable plan ready to implement, then it is unlikely you will receive a grant award. Associate every task to an objective. Make sure that you've listed all the tasks needed to accomplish each objective, beginning each task with a verb and assigning a cost, timeline, and responsible person for each task will help keep you organized. The step-by-step plan of action will generate a project timeline and guide budget development, so it is important to make it as detailed as possible. In addition, setting forth tasks or activities in this fashion can aid program planning. Without such a plan, certain necessary steps might be overlooked, which ultimately means your budget won't reflect the full cost. So you're going to go through your program and make sure you list any tasks that are part of the objectives and goals, and you're going to put down what step it is, who's responsible, and when it's going to be completed. After you do that, and you can do this in a spreadsheet, there's an example here. You list your goal at the top in one row, your objective underneath that, and then your action step, who's responsible, and when that's going to take place underneath each objective. After you've listed every task you can think of, then pass your worksheet around the office or your organization or the group of people that's writing the grant or that's working together on the grant. Pass that around and have people take a look at it and have them list any additional ideas about what has to happen to accomplish this objective. Getting others to participate in this process also facilitates buy-in. So maybe you have someone in your organization that's not too keen on this plan, but if you can get them involved by making sure they have input on what action steps need to be taken, it'll help provide buy-in for them, which will be important once you get your grant and you start implementing these things, to have everybody on staff involved with the grant implementation. At this point, your plan of action will probably be too detailed for the grant proposal. So you'll need to go back and summarize those tasks, but the more detail that you have provided in your plan of action worksheet, the better it will be when you go to implement this. You'll already have most of the work done and all of the action steps that you need to complete done for this section. So once you get the details, go back and summarize those for your grant proposal. One key thing about grants is how are they going to be evaluating the outcomes? Why do you need to know the evaluation and outcomes? Or why do they need to know the evaluations and outcomes? Including an evaluation plan in a grant proposal provides the opportunity to discuss what the program should ultimately achieve. The evaluation is essentially a technical document used by staff and board members, as well as grant makers, to elevate the success of the program. The evaluation design depends on what information you need to collect in order to make major discussions as the program matures, and to write solid reports for the grant makers, your board, and others involved in the program. To start writing the evaluation section, I'd suggest asking a few basic questions. What does the grant maker want the information in order, or does the grant maker want the information in order to decide if they will provide future funding? Will your board of directors refer to the evaluation to make program decisions? And will you issue a press release or post the information to your website? These are 3 questions to ask when developing your evaluation. Another question is, what kinds of information is needed to help someone decide how to proceed with this particular program? What success will provide the most credible information? What is the best way to collect and document the information? And when do you need the information collected and analysis prepared to distribute? These are all questions you're going to be asking yourself when developing your evaluation and your evaluation plan. There are 3 possible approaches to consider when developing your evaluation: in-house evaluation team, which is your program director, staff, board members, etc. An outside evaluation team, this can include board members as well, a community leader, or someone in your field of work who is not directly linked to your organization. You can also offer small honorariums, such as $100 to $500 for your evaluation committee. And you can include that in your grant proposal as well. You can also use professional evaluators. This is the most non-biased form, but it's also the most expensive. There are a lot of independent contractors that are professional evaluators. You also need to figure out whether or not you want qualitative or quantitative, or both, data for your evaluation. Qualitative evaluations are somewhat open-ended and examine a small number of cases in detail. The process often involves collecting vignettes, testimonies, and/or comments from the program participants. Quantitative evaluations are based on statistics and are more scientific in their approach. Remember, the evaluation section of the grant request should stress that the evaluation methods has been carefully planned and demonstrate that the evaluation plan can be implemented. Keep in mind, accuracy, clarity, and tone are all important when writing the final evaluation, as it may directly affect future funding. So once you've developed your plan, implemented your grant, and collected all of your evaluation information, you're going to want to make sure that when you present this to the grant maker, you are being positive, so that you can build a relationship with this grant maker. Next is the timeline. Developing a project timeline for the grant maker is an opportunity for them to see how you would put their funding to work. It's yet another section of the grant proposal to sell your project to the grant maker. A visual timeline can be a powerful tool. It can convince someone that what you intend to do can be done. So you can do this with a spreadsheet. You're going to want to color code all of your taskbars. So if you have tasks that need to be ordering things, you can have all of those on your program timeline one color. If you need to contact certain people, all of those could be blue. All of your purchases could be green. All of your deadlines can be red. You can color code them, and that'll help keep you organized as well as make it visually appealing. But you also want to make sure that your timeline is concise, easy to read, and make sure different people review it. This will help make sure you don't forget anything. Next is the budget for your program. Most grant makers will want to see two different budgets. The first one is the proposed project, and then the second one is your annual organization's operating budget. The operating budget for your organization will be dumped into your folder that we talked about at the beginning, so you can just pull that when you're ready. And the the program budget will be used for the actual program that you're applying for the grant. You will need to revisit your program budget several times as you continue to develop the proposal, adding and taking away some things that have changed in your proposal, and make sure that your budget is clear. I know I'm running short on time, so I'm trying to hurry up through this. So after you've gotten all of your components written and put together, you can then reread over it and write your executive summary. The executive summary or abstract is the single most important part of the grant proposal. It can be anywhere from several lines to a full page in length. The summary should be both succinct and complete. You're going to want to develop this component of the grant proposal by summarizing the main points of all the other sections, beginning by outlining each of the proposal sections, and use that outline to develop the concise and complete summary. While the executive summary comes at the beginning of the grant, it should be the last thing that you write. When writing an executive summary, you are trying to accomplish two things: create curiosity for the reader and establish credibility for your organization. Why should you create curiosity? Usually you can't have a face-to-face discussion with the reader, so you need to find a way to draw them into the conversation. Make them curious about what you are doing and why you feel compelled to do it. Here are a few ways to build curiosity. Use provocative questions to draw the reader in, and share just enough information to make the reader want to know more is always a good way to make them stay longer on your proposal. After you've written all of your documents for your grant proposal, oftentimes you're able to add attachments. I have provided a list of examples of attachments here on this slide. If you have any more attachments than 5, if you're allowed to attach as many items as you'd like, make sure that in your attachments you provide a table of contents so that the grant reviewer can go through and say, oh, well, on page X of the attachments, there is the resume of all the staff, or on page 5 is a list of all their board members. So if you have more than 5 attachments, make sure you create a table of contents. These attachments are to support your proposal. It often includes endorsements letters, profiles of board members, resumes of those involved, any tables and graphs or supporting research, any organizational publications, any news articles, photographs, architectural drawings. The attachment section can be pretty open-ended unless the grant funder is asking for specific items. But once again, make sure that it's organized and easy to follow, and if there's more than 5 items, please include a table of contents. So you've got your grant ready to go. Now you need to make sure you edit it. Read over it yourself, fix any of the mistakes you see, and then have others read it. There's 2 different types of people that you should have read over your grant: those who are involved with the project and those who are not involved. Those who are involved in the project will catch some of the grammar and some of the smaller mistakes that you may have or that maybe you overlooked, or they'll also catch things that maybe didn't get included in the grant, so you can go back and add it. But then those who are not involved, if you have someone completely oblivious to your program that you're applying for, have them read over it and make sure it makes sense to them. They can offer insight and say, this won't work or that won't work, or I don't understand that. Could you please clarify it? That's a big help when you're editing. And then set all deadlines for your grant proposal to be submitted 2 weeks from the grant deadline, so it gives you some built-in flexibility. And then make sure you go back over the grant application before you submit it to make sure you have included everything the grant maker has asked for. And thank you for attending today. This was my first webinar that I've done. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to help. If you would like to email me with questions, I can do that as well.
Brandon?
Yes.
Melissa said that color coding is good, except that you can't do that with federal grants. It needs to be black only. And Bill Gore has a question. I wonder what other options might achieve the same goal.
Yeah, with federal grants, they're kind of a whole nother ballpark. Just because there's a lot of forms and a lot of specifics they have to follow, and Melissa's right on that. I'm not quite sure what is meant by I wonder what other options might achieve the same goal. Is there a way to
We were
clarify
wondering,
that?
yeah, we want to achieve a certain thing by changing color. So could we achieve the same thing by, say, changing font or the print size?
So you won't want to change font per se, but you can bold things. Be sure when you're writing your full proposal that you include headers and subheadings of each section. So that helps draw attention, similar to the font, or I'm sorry, the color changing. But as far as changing font, you typically don't want to change the top font face. If you have a long quote, you can reduce the font size and put it into quotes and center that on your proposal as well to draw attention to it. But changing completely different fonts probably is not the best.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, what other attention grabbing options might we have is what I was thinking about.
Is there any other questions?
Sorry, it wasn't meant as like to trip you up or anything.
Like I said, if you have any questions, I would email. Oh, sorry, Bill.
Oh, no, don't worry about it.
So thank you all for attending. If you have any other questions, please email me at brandon@iplks.org. I will be happy to help answer any questions that you may have. I will be recording this and sending it out later today. So thank you all for coming. Stay safe, stay healthy, and the library looks forward to being back open as soon as we can to help with any grant writing questions you may have. So thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yes.